hanging up on our wall.
Everyone should have Allison's articles hanging from their Nana's house in a framed frame. Yes. Hi everybody. How are we doing? Welcome. Good Thursday to you. Happy April. Happy Passover and Easter. We've got all the major religious holidays covered on this one. So happy of those. We are once again excited to be joined by our featured winemaker of the month. This time it is Patrick Kelley from Cavaletti Vineyards, who is here with us. Before we get started, of course, just our regular ground rules. We're going to mute everybody before we launch into our discussion. So if you want to communicate with Patrick, ask questions. Of course, we absolutely love to hear what everybody's got cooking, what they're eating. So throw those into the chat and we will get everything there. Oh, okay. That's Roger and Peggy. Got it. You can always change your name. If you look at the three little dots at the top of your window, there should be a rename down there. So you don't have to be Tom Toole. You can be Roger and Peggy. That's fine. So throw it in the chat and then we'll leave a little bit of time at the end where we'll unmute everybody and chat lets you ask Patrick any questions that you have directly. Okay, so now it's time for me to hit the big mute button. Allison, Patrick, you'll need to unmute yourself after I do so, of course, which I have done. So you can feel free to unmute. And we'll start, as we always do, by asking our guest, Patrick, who again needs to unmute himself because he's still muted. There he goes. What is the best bottle of wine that you have ever opened and enjoyed?
Man, that is tough. But I feel like there's a lot of pressure. I mean, like
it's always a thinker.
Attention here.
Yeah.
Currently, I would say it's the Cavaletti Vineyards Alicante Bouschet. But put that aside.
Excellent plug. Yes, good.
I think I was in Europe with some former colleagues, and we had a bottle of Montrachet, and it just blew my mind.
Nice.
It was really that. I think that was the one wine, and I'll be honest, I don't remember the producer. Did I lose you guys?
No, we still can hear you. Can you hear us?
Crazy.
We gotcha. Yeah.
Anyway, I'm here, but I can't see myself anymore. No worries. We'll figure that out afterwards. Yeah, it was the one bottle of wine where I was completely enamored with it. And I thought, wow, if ever I could do that with any variety, that would be amazing. So that was kind of my epiphany bottle, if you will. I will go back and say, I don't remember what the bottle was, but my wife and I, probably 20 years ago, went to Andrew Murray. And it was the first time we were at his tasting room. It was the first time I ever tasted wine where I went, oh, that's what people are talking about with good wine. So there you go. We've got two of them there.
Nice. Excellent choices. So we are going to start tonight with the Muse, the 2020 Saint Ynez Valley Viognier Chardonnay blend. So if everybody wants to pour that in their glass, they can. And speaking of muses, Patrick, what was your muse to get in the wine industry? What were you doing before you became a winemaker, and what was your trigger moment? That was it the Montrachet, was it Andrew Murray, or was it something else that launched you into the world of being a winemaker?
I was in a hotel room in some strange city in China, of which I couldn't pronounce the name. I couldn't find it on a map. I realized that
it probably had over 5 million people, though.
It did. It had 5 million people, and there was skyscrapers everywhere. And I remember thinking to myself, I just don't think I was put on the earth to be doing this. And that started me thinking about, what do I want to do when I grow up? And, I was 40 at the time. So it was probably time to figure out what I wanted to do when I grew up. And that was it. I came home from that business trip and kind of told my wife, you know what, I think I'm gonna open up a winery. And fortunately, she was really supportive of that, because not most spouses would be. You say, hey, you've got a great career, you're by all accounts successful. Yeah, why don't you just throw that in the garbage and do something different? So
And
right there you go.
what were you doing in this previous career?
I was managing sales teams, selling databases and various products into biotech and pharmaceutical companies.
Okay, because I was going to say, if you were like some finance guy, you would have thought better than getting into the wine business.
It is so true.
Unless you needed a way to bring your tax base down against your bonuses and your investments every year.
I don't have that issue. Seriously, I definitely do not.
Nice. So interesting. All right, I think you're the first winemaker that we've had that was actually in China when they had the revelation to become a winemaker. So you win the award for that. So it begs the next question, which is, you're based in Moore Park. That's where you make wine. That's where your tasting room is. Why Moore Park? Why Ventura County? How did that come about?
Another good story. So my wife and I used to live in the San Fernando Valley. And then one day she came home and said, we're moving to Ventura County. And I said, where's Ventura County? And she said, no, it's fine. We're going to move to a place called Santa Rosa Valley. She had always been a horse lover and she'd had horses, but she kept them far away from our house. And ever since she was a little girl, she wanted to have horses at home. She said, I found a short sale. We're going to buy this fixer-upper house. It's in rural Ventura County.
The good old days when there were short sales and fixer-uppers.
I know. And we moved out here. That was kind of it. We sold our tiny little house in Sherman Oaks, traded it for 3 acres out in Santa Rosa Valley, and that moved us out here. And it's been great. I love it out here. We are kind of the first agricultural community north of Los Angeles, so we're still close to LA. You can go down there. It makes calling on wine bars and restaurants very convenient for me. But I mean, I'm across the street. I have an avocado orchard. There's one behind me. There's fields throughout our community. So it's just a great spot. I just love it out here.
You know, I have to say that your wife wanting to move to the country to be near horses as a childhood dream and throwing that on you makes so much more sense than you being in China looking at high rises and deciding of all the things you wanted to do instead, it was be a winemaker.
Yeah, well, we lived out here then. So maybe the backstory on that. I was making a little bit of wine, like for family and friends. And I had said, this is not a commercial venture. I will never sell a bottle of wine. I'm just doing this for fun. And then lo and behold, I jumped into it.
Yeah, nobody who makes wine just for home use everybody eventually becomes commercial. It's just, you can't not start. You can only give away so much. Eventually you're like, all right, I've got to make a little bit of money off of this just to justify myself.
Plus, when people like it, ego gets ahead and you're like, well, if
That's
they
true.
like it for free, I wonder if they'll pay for it.
Or if you like it, if you say, this is really good.
The federal government isn't listening, but you can make 210 gallons of wine at home. And right now I've got this desk, and on both sides of the desk, there's open space. And I had barrels. I had 4 barrels on either side of the desk. They were double stacked. And that's when I sort of realized, like, maybe this is a little bigger than friends and family.
Nice. So how far are you from the biggest little farm, since David asked that?
So the biggest little farm is based in Moore Park. We're probably 6 miles from there.
Oh, okay. So you could do both in a day. That'd be a fun little trip. You should talk with them about co-marketing.
Anybody who ever wants to come out to Ventura County, the day is you go to Underwood Farms, and then you can go to Apricot Lane Farms, and then you can come to the winery.
Nice.
Do you have, the winery is on your property?
No. The winery is in an industrial facility, right in the heart of kind of Old Town Moore Park. So.
And you don't have any vines there in Ventura?
Oh, I do.
Oh.
So we have, so the aforementioned wife with the horses, she initially took over every square foot of property we have. And then we had a grass turnout. I said, I really want to plant some vines there. And she grudgingly agreed with me. And so we have a 1/4 acre on our own property here, which I make 2 barrels from. And then I farm 1, 2, 3, 4 vineyards in Ventura County and 1 other vineyard in Los Angeles County.
Okay. What varietal are you growing on your property?
Syrah, Grenache, Mourvèdre, and a little bit of Sangiovese.
Oh wow, that's quite a bit in a quarter quarter acre.
Well, when you think about these things and you're starting, you're like, oh, I'll plant a little of this, a little of that, and then kind of see what would work.
You thought you were Burgundy, one row of this, one row of that, and
Exactly.
But it's a very methodical, it's not a field blend. You know exactly what's what.
I know exactly what's what. I have made field blends from the property before, and actually they're spectacular. It kind of opened up my eyes to making field blends. But no, it's block by block. And actually as I've gotten into this, the majority of it is Grenache and Mourvèdre. Okay. They do really well here in Ventura.
So you said you're farming Ventura and one LA.
Yep.
Did you ever do up north? Because I was under I for some reason thought you did you reached up to San Ynez.
You're absolutely correct. I was there yesterday. Visited the 12 different vineyards we work with up in Santa Barbara County as well.
And that's a nice segue into talking about the Muse, since this is a San Ynez Valley wine. Where was San Ynez kind of when you decided to be a winemaker and needed to start sourcing grapes? Did you initially source from up there, or where were you first sourcing, and how did you come to find the vineyards that you use for the Muse?
So I initially started off with vineyards in Ventura County and Los Angeles County, but I very quickly realized that LA County is a little limited. There's only a handful of vineyards. Many belong to private residences, which means on average every 8 years they turn over and someone new comes in who has a different set of values or aspirations, so whatever. Right. So I was always going to need a bigger region to play with. So that took me up to Santa Barbara. I first went up to Santa Barbara in 2017 for Sangiovese. And then subsequently, I don't know, now I do about 20 tons out of there. So it's just kind of crept up year after year. For me, the initial foray into getting Sangiovese up there led me to a farming company called Boniterra Farming. Mm-hmm. They've planted out originally most of the famous plantings up there. Camp 4 Vineyard they planted everything for Fess Parker going back into the 80s. And they've continued to farm a number of vineyards. So I pretty much partner with them. I also work with a couple of small vineyards here and there throughout San Ynez. Just kind of depends.
Yeah, you tell them what you want and they steer you to the vineyards that have what you're looking for, type of situation.
Well, and that are well matched to the varieties that they have planted in that place.
Got it. So what drew you to these two varietals? Because Viognier and Chardonnay, for a long period of time, you never saw those two together. And I feel like it's only been over the last maybe 5, 6, 7 years that finally the Rhone and Burgundy have started to come together.
So this is a good story. Initially, I was attracted to Viognier because I'm a Syrah lover. So if Syrah does well in a place, and it does very well in Santa Barbara, also in Ventura County, I thought logically Viognier would probably do well as well. So that's why I started working with Viognier. The Viognier in this wine comes from Ballard Canyon. Chardonnay was a bit of an opportunity. There's a great vineyard out in the Santa Rita Hills called the Rio Vista Vineyard, and they planted Chardonnay. And it was the first opportunity where they were going to be harvesting, and I got a chance to get in at the ground floor. Nice. That fruit's always allocated to a lot of high-end producers, and I was just willing to roll the dice, and it was great. The funny story on combining those two wines is in my head, I thought about a Viognier Chardonnay blend, but the truth is I totally made a mistake. I inadvertently topped up the barrels of Viognier that I had with Chardonnay one day.
Oh.
And you can't unblend wine. So I was like, well, I guess it's going to be a Viognier Chardonnay blend. And then ultimately it worked out great. I don't even think I altered from the original percentages we had, which was like 82% Viognier and 18% Chardonnay.
Yeah. Now that's interesting because, 82% Viognier, you're still technically within the classification where you could have just called it a Viognier. So is there some method to that madness, or you just decided to be honest with your drinkers and your customers?
I mean, first of all, it's a better story to say, look,
I screwed up, and
I love that you enjoy this wine, but it was totally a mistake. I mean, let's be honest, these things happen. And my spin on this, or my take on it, really is I must have been divinely inspired to make that blend, because probably on my own, I wouldn't have been as cavalier about that. Mm-hmm. I also think what the Chardonnay from Santa Rita Hills brings in is a bit of acidity and liveliness that Viognier oftentimes can be lacking. So
Actually, I was going to ask you, well, I have a question, but let me ask you first. Ventura County, where the Viognier is from, right?
Viognier is from Ballard Canyon.
Ballard County, sorry.
Malta.
Well, we can jump back. I have a question about the climate of Ventura, but we'll do that when we have Ventura fruit. But
That'll
back
be
on
the
this
next
one,
yeah.
Chardonnay, we know when grown properly, it's a neutral grape that really expresses the place it's from. And so it can bring a lot of acidity to it. And Viognier, when picked at the right time, can also have beautiful acidity, but has the aromatics.
Yeah.
But I think you kind of hit on it. First of all, does this see any oak? Is it lees stirring? What are you doing to the wine itself?
So I have kind of a standard method for whites and rosés. They start off, we whole cluster press everything, goes in a stainless steel. We let the gross lees settle. So this is when it's just juice. We rack off, and then we will go ahead and ferment clean in cold stainless. So 55 to 62 degrees. We get it moving along about 2/3 of the way through fermentation, or halfway through fermentation, depending upon if we need that tank space. We transfer over to neutral oak barrels, and we'll finish fermentation in neutral oak. That works.
And then
really
you
well.
blend at the end.
I blend typically just before bottling.
Okay.
So the wine sits separate for, in this case, a year. And then right at the year mark, we kind of go to the blending table, run through what we think is best, put it together, and bottle it.
Got it.
So on that, just to finish that thought, sorry, Chris.
No, that's okay.
So you've got a little neutral oak, so that's adding to the kind of mouthfeel, the adding the roundness on the palate. Yep. You've got these. Would you say that the Viognier on its own has acidity, or does the Chardonnay really bring it in, or is it a nice enhancement? You know, I mean, because it's got lovely acidity.
Yeah, I think it's a nice sort of middle ground level of acidity that comes from the Chardonnay. Like the Chardonnay is Santa Rita Hills Chardonnay is very minerally, very acid driven. Yeah. That's one of the defining characteristic. And I pick it on the basis of acidity. Viognier has no acidity. So we've had a bit of experience over the past 2 years where we've made wines for custom crush clients, some of which really want to pick early. So we've had Viognier in the winery picked at 20 bricks. It's like Viognier, but watered back and really uninteresting. And I've taken Viognier at 15.5% alcohol, where it's aromatic, it's big, it's fleshy. Yeah. But it's missing that level of acidity. Right. So it's hard. Viognier is really tricky. It's hard to get that kind of middle path where you've got the best of both worlds. So blending kind of helps you to augment that, I think.
Yeah. And I was going to say, for those that are not familiar with the concept of cold fermentation, where you're talking about fermenting both of the whites at about 55 degrees, that really helps with the aromatics. If I'm correct, cold fermentation is basically all about bringing out the aromatics in the wine. Yeah.
So what you see is yeast go through two different metabolic pathways, depending upon the temperature at which the fermentation happens. You'll get tropical notes at one temperature, and you'll get more kind of classic apple fruit noted honey at different temperatures. Ironically, I chill the wine down and almost nothing happens for about a week, and I end up having to turn the temperature off, let it heat up to winery temperature. Mm-hmm. It gets started, and then we kind of cycle chilling it just to keep it realistically probably about 63 to 64 degrees, and that seems to be about ideal for us.
Are you doing native ferments or inoculating?
Not on the whites. Whites and rosés will get inoculated because at those temperatures, literally nothing happens. We're like, we want to get it started. We want to avoid any problems. Yeah. And we just found inoculated yeast seems to work best for that.
Yeah. Natural yeast, unfortunately, I think it's hard to survive at the colder temperatures, where they want more of the room temperatures to exist. So inoculating with a yeast that will sustain itself in a cooler temperature, I think makes a lot of sense for that. So interesting. And then, yeah, as Allison mentioned, the neutral oak, finishing the fermentation in the neutral oak probably brings more of the body out in the wine, really finishes it, gives it the fullness. So you do that for all your whites. What other whites are you working with?
So Viognier, Chardonnay, Roussanne, Marsanne, Grenache, Blanc. We worked with Fiano this past season, Albarino. think that's it. And a little bit of Muscat came through for a hot second, but primarily the Rhone whites and then Chardonnay for me personally.
Got it. And are you working with all those on the regular, or is this like you're experimenting every year? Maybe you're getting a half ton or a ton of something and just doing a barrel or a couple of barrels of it just to play around with it?
You plan these things out and you set up contracts.
And then God laughs, right?
Yeah, and you harvest according to like, oh, this blend should totally work. Or, hey, this percentage worked last year, and you bring it into the winery and it just never works out that way. For me, kind of standards for us are going to be a Rhone white blend. So it's Grenache Blanc on the regular, Marsanne, and Viognier.
Mm-hmm.
Chardonnay as well. We do a Santa Rita Hills Chardonnay. So those are kind of the whites, but I can't help myself. Every so often I see something that seems interesting and I have to just bring it in. So
nice. You remind me of another former LA home winemaker turned commercial winemaker, David from Switzer Cellars.
Yep.
That's right. Yeah. Who same thing. He just can't resist getting a bit of this and a bit of that. And every year we're going to do something new. And then I'm going to age it for 5 years and see what happens. And
I just had one of their Pinot Noirs like last week.
Nice. Yeah. It's fun. It's a good way to do it. And I think it makes it exciting for your club members, your fans, your followers, because, while it's fun to enjoy the same wines year in and year out, where you can see the evolution and flow from the vintages, it's always great to have something new and exciting that really push your bounds as a winemaker and let you try things and test things out and whatnot.
Absolutely.
Nice. Perfect. So let's talk food pairings with this one. It's got, nice acidity from that Chardonnay, not too overpowering. It's, certainly not like apple, like bite into it crisp, but what are some of the food pairings that you generally recommend with this wine?
For me, seafood, like I just think seafood. But I am like the worst person, because if I like a wine, I will drink it with absolutely everything. So I'm probably the last person you should ask on this.
I think it would go well with like a nice grilled sea bass, or a fleshy fish, but not a heavy one.
Yeah.
But like a nice fleshy fish.
Yeah.
We've lately done cod, sea bass. We've got frozen tilapia fillets that I always end up eating, like on a Tuesday night when you don't want to cook anything else. Those work really well. But for me, it's just a really drinkable wine. It's hard for me to think of like something that would be super awkward with that particular wine.
Yeah,
it's just really pleasurable.
It's pretty diverse in what it would go with. I'm feeling like a quiche with this. I could see this with egg dishes, like a quiche Lorraine or a Florentine quiche with some spinach in it would be really nice, or like a nice omelet with a Swiss or a Gruyere, some nuttiness. Summer salad, Scott says. I could see that with some nice bitter greens.
Ooh,
aged pecorino.
I like that.
Nice.
I'm waiting to hear what I'm not seeing him chewing, but I'm waiting to hear what he paired with this.
Shrimp pad thai is what he just threw out.
Okay.
Called the little spice, which I could see, because it does have that little bit of fruitiness kind of on the mid palate. It would tame nothing too overpowering, but maybe just a slight hint of like a Thai spice or a jalapeno or something. Really flesh it down a little bit.
But I think Patrick, your point was made, because if you go from a summer salad fish to a summer salad to aged pecorino to shrimp pad thai, this is a wine that has diversity of opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a fastball right up the middle. If you were going to bring a wine to a dinner and you didn't know what was going to be served, you'd be safe with this.
Yeah. I'm also going to throw out just like a classic diner grilled cheese with this as well. Would be phenomenal. So
what goes poorly with the grilled cheese?
Bourbon and grilled cheese are not a great pairing together. Not that I've ever experienced that, but hey, let's move on to the next wine, which is your 109 mile rosé. And 109 miles is kind of your it's not your raison d'etre, but it's a bit of a coda that you have adopted. So why don't you kind of walk us through what is 109 miles? I imagine it's slightly, more than Eminem's 8 Mile. So
I'm glad you know the difference between 8 and 109.
hey, you better lose yourself in the moment. You want it. Never let it go. You only get one shot, so make sure your chance to blow. All right.
That was
Go ahead.
gangster, Chris. Good job. So when I started this project, you do as a winemaker have to think about, why are you doing this? Like, what is it you want to accomplish? Because there's so many wineries on the planet.
Yep.
I can say confidently, I am the only one solely focused on this particular region. And this region goes from Los Alamos in the north. Specifically, it's 109 miles from my doorstep to the White Hawk Vineyard. And as far south as Rancho Cucamonga. Inland, we would go as far east as Tehachapi. So that encompasses San Bernardino County, Los Angeles County, Ventura County, and Santa Barbara. And I think technically we could kind of cut into a corner of San Luis Obispo County, but there's nothing growing in that area. So
I was going to say it might also get a smidge of Riverside County, but
Riverside as well. Actually, no, you're completely correct.
Wait, you said San Bernardino, Los Angeles, Ventura, San Ynez,
Santa Barbara County, yes, correct.
Santa Barbara County.
Kern County as well. I've got fruit from Kern County before.
interesting.
So there's nobody really focused.
Suck
on
it, Orange County. Sorry.
Yeah, well, we could probably go to Orange County if there was anything planted.
There is a little there is a little bit in Orange County. I know, like in the Back Bay, there's a couple of private vineyards, and then down towards like the Trabuco and Santiago canyons, and on the backside of Laguna Beach, there's some vineyards planted there.
But I think
There's some also in North San Diego, but that might take you past 109 miles.
Yeah.
so. Here's the deal: it allows me to focus and to think about, I work with this, but not that area. So every year opportunities come up. Someone in Paso Robles says, are you interested in Tanat? And I'm able to say, no, that's not really what I do. Bless you.
Thank you.
Yeah, so that's how that got started. The 109 Mile Rosé is always kind of a rotating group of vineyards that I source rosé from. So that's why that's, if you will, it's my AVA level wine.
Mm-hmm. Got it.
So it's a blend of vineyards.
Correct. So it's always what I've kind of finalized on is it's roughly a 60-40 blend, Tempranillo and Grenache. And then there's always some accompanying character that gets popped in at the last minute to really kind of round out the wines. It's been, so the Tempranillo in this vintage came from the Estelle Vineyard in Santa Ynez. The Grenache came from the Swayze Vineyard in Los Angeles County.
Mhm.
And then we've got a little bit of Grenache Blanc from Camp 4, which is also in Santa Barbara. But in the past, it's been 100% Los Angeles County fruit. I've pulled in a little from Ventura. It just kind of depends. And it's nice to have such a broad range of regions because, as an example, the Grenache can get pretty ripe in Los Angeles County.
Mm-hmm.
So I harvest Tempranillo 6 weeks later from Santa Barbara. I can basically calibrate that pick for that blend and bring it in a little bit lighter, a little bit bigger, whatever. So that's probably the big benefit I get from having such a broad region that I work with.
Got it. Got it.
What would-
Go ahead.
What would
Allison.
you say, you have a focus in terms of your regions that you work with, and you said no one else really focuses on those, because I know there are LA winemakers, but they're not necessarily sourcing from Ventura or the other places.
Ventura, Santa Barbara, correct.
Yeah. But I'm curious, if you were going to describe your wines, how would you describe your style to be?
Wines of personality and place. So I think of those two things. So place, my default setting is single vineyard, single varietal wines. And when I can do that, it's great. I like to, personally for me, the best thing I can do is farm grapes to the utmost perfection and then turn that into a wine. I love that. But that doesn't always work out. So the second thing I want the wines to have some personality. I don't want them to taste like everybody else's wines. So that's kind of how I think about it.
Would you say you take a more restrained approach? You have a bigger style down the middle? It depends on the grape.
I think I'm down the middle. I mean, I have to be honest. On reds, I generally pick quite a bit later, and I like bigger, riper flavors. I don't know if everyone's familiar with the concept of tasters and non-tasters.
Super tasters?
Super taster?
And super tasters, correct. So people are broadly in 3 different categories: super tasters, non-tasters, and tasters, depending upon the number of nerve endings you have in your tongue. I've been tested. I'm a non-taster, so I need big, bold flavors in order to get enjoyment out of a glass of wine. And I think that's kind of what I lean into. And that's what this region does really well anyway. So, yeah.
Nice. So you have mentioned a couple times that you're farming several different vineyards throughout Ventura, LA counties. So are you actually getting to, are you, participating in the green harvesting and the pruning and the entire vineyard process? Or is it more, you have your block, you monitor it, then you harvest the fruit from that, or kind of let the vineyard owner handle the day-to-day operations on it?
There are no professional vineyard management companies in Ventura County. None, not one. So we literally, myself and my assistant winemaker, do everything. So this week, we weed whacked a vineyard, a hillside vineyard. It's about 2 acres. We were doing shoot thinning. We were spraying for mildew. This morning, we planted a vineyard, redid the irrigation, planted a whole block of Syrah. Yeah, we literally do everything. It's not like, oh, we farm a vineyard and a bunch of guys come in and take care of it. It's all on our dime, and usually it's our hands that are doing the work.
Interesting. So Stacy's asked an interesting question about rosé. She wants to know what level of, and she puts this in quotes, she puts the word sweetness in quotes. Do you try with your rosé? And have you noticed your customers want a sweeter? I think you could swap out fruitier for sweeter. Or do they want a drier version, and have you kind of altered how you make the rosé to fit your customer base? Or are you really just taking what the grapes give you?
It's an interesting question. So philosophically, I'm always pushing to do a dry style of rosé. Now, however, in this particular year, the Grenache Blanc, for whatever reason, it was relatively low alcohol, stuck. It had about 5 grams of residual sugar in there, which is right at the level of perception. But most of the sweetness that you're picking up in the rosé is actually a result of the winemaking process. So we have done, if you talk to winemakers and you listen to them go on endlessly about nerdy stuff, they'll talk about cutting press fractions in making a white or a rosé wine. So you do a gentle press with your press, you get this very lightly colored wine. Great. And most people will say they do a gentle press on rosé and they get a very pale colored wine, and it's dry and it's very Provençal. We have run that experiment, and what we found with Tempranillo in particular is the heavier press, we just get this massive explosion of fruit flavors that you perceive as sweetness. And so we've just kind of continued to do that. On the customer side, the style of rosé, we've made this effectively this rosé now for 3 or 4 years, and we sell out of it every year. It seems to be what people want, but I have a number of people come into the tasting room and say, I only drink sweet wines.
Right.
And a whole bunch of other people, probably the vast majority, who say, I don't like sweet rosés.
Yeah.
Well, so there is a tiny bit of residual sugar on this one.
5 grams per liter, which would be right at the threshold for sensing going, I like that, but I don't know why.
Well, I think what's nice when it's just at that level is that it gives it a kind of a sweet fruit note on it, but the acidity balances out, so it's not a sweet wine.
Yeah.
But you get that richness in the mid palate, and you get this kind of candied flavor in the back of the palate, but the acidity is there that just, like any good, properly made sweet wine, if you go to Moscatos or Bracchettos or anything else, it's the acidity, Riesling, it's the acidity that you need. Right. There's nothing wrong with residual sugar in wine from perceptible to non-perceptible, as long as you have acidity.
I completely agree. And that was actually why Grenache Blanc got worked in this year, because the Tempranillo and Grenache on their own, a pretty warm season this past year. So they didn't have a ton of acidity, but the Grenache Blanc was just blazing with acidity. And we added that in, and that just gives it that really long finish that I think is ideal for what you want in a rosé.
Yeah. And Roger/Tom pointed out to me that the fruit in the rosé makes you think sweet, and that's why it's working with Mexican food. He paired this with vegetarian enchiladas Swayzes, and thought it was just a really excellent pairing, which we'll get to in a minute.
And I think this would go well with your pad thai, your shrimp pad thai.
Yeah, that would be good with the shrimp pad thai. So this is a direct press rosé, or are you doing this Saunier style? So it is direct press.
Direct press. I don't generally like Saunier style rosés. For me, with the fruit that we work with, you tend to get into, as the fruit gets quite a bit riper, you get into like these cranberry notes that I don't really dig as a rosé.
Yeah, and sometimes you cross that 5 grams per liter threshold, and you can end up with too sweet a rosé, and you have to either add tartaric acid back to it to balance it out or whatnot. How do you decide? Because you mentioned it's a rotating group of vineyards and different grapes come up. So if you're doing direct press, how are you deciding on which grapes to use for the rosé? Is it something that you're monitoring over the course of the year, or do you make a decision sort of at the beginning of the year, January, February, generally when you have to order the grapes from the vineyards? How does that decision making happen?
Well, in the past, I have sourced from the Swayze Vineyard, and that's been great. We picked the Tempranillo first. The pick decision is very straightforward. What we wait for is grapes go through veraison. That's the process of them starting to color up. When you crush them in a plastic bag, you're looking for rosé grapes where you've got a tinge of pink and red. Prior to that, it'll be kind of brown and a little dirty looking. It looks like dirty water. That's basically, and you'll see this evolution, and it's kind of day by day. Once you start to see that pink tinge, it's usually about time to pick. LA County, that'll be 22 and a half to 23 bricks. So I'm thinking about blocks specifically for rosé, but this past vintage, coyotes came through and chewed through the irrigation lines at the Swayze Vineyard. And I took a look at the Tempranillo and I said to myself, it's too ripe. I'm just going to skip making rosé out of this, and I'll pull in Tempranillo from Santa Barbara as that component. And then we just went to the Grenache. So it kind of depends. I just sourced Grenache yesterday from a small vineyard in Santa Ynez, specifically for rosé. So
interesting.
Yeah.
Nice. Cool. Yeah, I love a good rosé, and it is very much in that California style with that sort of bigger, bolder fruit to it. And while I do, I can be a bit of a rosé snob, and I do like more of the Provençal, the drier, more citrusy driven style. Sometimes those can get overpowering because you almost get an absence of fruit, or you get that like super underripe strawberry flavor where it's like tartness for the sake of tartness. But this is, I agree with some of the comments we've had. This is just really nicely balanced between the fruitiness and the acid that's on there. It has a richer mouthfeel. Are you doing this all in stainless steel tank, I imagine?
No, none of it.
Oh, no.
Just like the white wine.
It is exactly the same thing. But I will tell you, the reason I started doing that was the first rosés I made, I did entirely in stainless. And, you bottle rosé relatively early. And I felt like they were a little austere and linear. And they were best after a year of being in bottle, at which point they're sold out. And I thought, that's a real disservice to a consumer who wants to enjoy the rosé right upon release. So I moved them to neutral oak, and it tends to soften them up and round off the edges quite a bit. And then we bottle typically February or March.
Yeah. It's also really flying into the face of rosé convention, which is, it has to be the most recent vintage. And if it's even a year old, we're getting rid of it because it's not there. Now, I am a firm believer in being able to age a rosé for 1 to up to 3 years. I feel like there are some rosés out there that absolutely can improve with it. But unfortunately, I mean, just having done consumer research in this, rosé season is basically the first warm day until the first cold day. So you're looking at pretty much May, maybe an odd day in April until more or less like the week after Labor Day. And then you're pretty much off the shelves at that point.
Although that is not true, because while we have rosé season, rosés are drunk year round now. The biggest problem in California, I would say, with producers, and Patrick, maybe you can say this, maybe not, but I'm going to guess your production is small. A lot of producers sell out of their rosé by the end of that time. So they don't have rosé to sell in November.
Yeah, it's funny. So I do about 150 cases of rosé a year, which seems like a good volume for me. We sell out of it in 12 months. But damned if I don't sell 30 or 40 cases kind of over the winter months.
Yep. Yeah.
I mean,
that's people like me and Allison.
Yeah.
And Stacy.
And Stacy. Yes, exactly.
I'm a big proponent of drink rosé year round. There's no reason why you can't put a little chill on your red wine in the heat of summer. Some red's better than others for that. And have a nice whiter rosé in the winter. And we all live in California, so who cares?
It's not rosé all day, it's rosé all year. But I was talking more from a like business distributor retailer standpoint, which if you talk to people in those businesses, they will tell you that even if there is consumer demand on the direct to consumer side, if you're looking at distributing your wines, if you have rosés, whatever that current vintage is, by the time September comes, like you might as well take that wine back and try to sell it yourself, because you're not going to be able to move it in that way, which is a shame, because there are fantastic, like I said, single-year-old, 2-year-old, even 3-year-old rosés out there that need just a little bit of that age, that microoxidation to really improve in the bottle.
Yeah, I agree. We are fortunate that we have a couple of wine bars that are both on premise, so you can enjoy the wine. You can enjoy the wine there, and you can buy bottles. And they just, basically, they tell us, look, as soon as your new rosé comes out, we're going to pour it by the glass until you tell us there's no more left. Mm-hmm. And that tends to be into December, so it's great for us.
And also, if you think about it, the reason I think you have no luck selling in a retail store is if you think about the end caps of any store, they're seasonal, like anything, right? As soon as Valentine's Day was done, they had Easter candies out, that kind of thing. Right. So you have rosé season, and boy, fall comes in, and suddenly you've got your Beaujolais corner to get into some, and then you get your champagne corner for the holidays, and it just keeps working through the year until you get into the new year, and it's like rosé time again.
Yeah, that's true. And during the hotter summer, the red wine section shrinks, the whites grow. During the winter and the fall, the red section grows, the whites shrink. You see less Albariños and Sauvignon Blancs and more Chardonnays, Marsannes, Roussannes. Yeah, it's an evolving practice in there. So we know that this goes well with the vegetarian enchiladas Swayzes. I would absolutely second anything shrimp. I think this would go phenomenally with. I'm also thinking like a shrimp Diablo would be a nice tasting, something with a little heat. I think, again, similar to the white, because it has that little extra fruitiness to it, this is a great wine to pair with something spicy, or something like a fresh corn galette with zucchini, thyme, and goat cheese. That is, I feel like I saw that on the Food Network back like circa 1995 on some recipe. Back when they actually did cooking shows then, instead of, just weird competition shows.
Goat cheese is hard too. If you like it with goat cheese, good on you. That's a tough pairing.
Yeah.
No, well, but I can see that more so than the white wine, I can see this with spice because of that fruit sweetness that you get. I'm not saying that this is a sweet wine, but it's got that richness of fruit that I think would do with it. And I think the same thing with goat cheese, because if you have that kind of chalkiness of a goat cheese and you take the roundness of this wine, they're going to kind of meld more than the white wine would do. Yeah. I think the white wine, the acidity could complement, but it would be a match. This is like a opposites. They harmony. I'm at a loss for my vocabulary today.
That's okay. You can, we'll untie your tongue somehow. But no, I think that makes sense because, goat cheese goes very well with strawberries, especially really ripe strawberries that have a little less acidity and a little more of that fruitiness. And that's a great way to describe this wine. It's, a little less acidic than a typical rosé, a little more fruity. But I could see it with the tartness. I mean, I could see it as a really nice complement with the tartness of a goat cheese. So yes, so go make a goat cheese tart, everybody. That'll be a fun little homework project for you.
I have
All
some
right.
feta cheese downstairs. Do you think feta would work?
See, I think the feta would be tougher because to me, feta is less tart and more salty.
Right.
And yeah, I don't know if this is a wine that's going to stand up to saltiness per se. I feel like saltiness, you need more acid to counteract it.
So unfortunately, I won't get to partake in the goat cheese joy.
Because salt is very basic and you need an acid to counteract that. Whereas goat cheese is, I guess, has more of the acid side. So, anyway. All right, Patrick, Allison and I were discussing this beforehand. We have our thought about which red we should dive into, but we wanted to hear it from you first. Which one should we go to, the Sangiovese or the Alicante?
I'm drinking Alicante. Let's go to Alicante.
Okay.
Really? I put my nose in that. That seemed much bigger, but okay.
The fact that we were even having that debate up front shows how unique and interesting your wines are. And this also gives me a nice chance to talk about, or for us to talk about, the Swayze Vineyard and LA County wines. And, what made you want to dive into the world of Los Angeles County vineyards? It's something that there's, only a handful of what one might consider very brave winemakers who are starting to, or folks who own their own vineyards, especially in Malibu, you see them trying to develop an LA County wine region. But it seems like LA County, it is a really like an undiscovered country, to quote Hamlet, in terms of winemaking.
So I was intrigued by the history of Los Angeles. So most people don't realize that the bonded winery #1 in California was in downtown Los Angeles. When you look at early pictures from the birth of Los Angeles, it's all farmland. I mean, Hollywood was farms. It's unbelievable. So I was curious about when it was dealer's choice, you had all of California to plant grapes. Why Los Angeles? And it has all the attributes you would want. Abundant sunshine, great soils, rainfall only in the wintertime, moderate climate. It's a Mediterranean climate. So for me, I was like, of course, why wouldn't you plant in Los Angeles? But today you drive around LA County and you just think, wow, it's all subdivisions and
large
asphalt.
Paved roads. Yes.
So I was
Kardashians
as well. I was intrigued with Los Angeles County. That's kind of why I started scouting out vineyards there. And then I found the Swayze Vineyard, which is in the high desert. It's in, it could be Wyoming, for God's sakes, when you live out there. But I quickly realized it's one of the highest altitude vineyards in California. It's over 3,000 feet of altitude. Climatically, it's a lot like Mendoza in Argentina. It's got sunshine all season, cool nights, really hot days. And I tentatively made a little bit of wine from there way back in like 2015. And it was beautiful. And I was
where is it exactly? You said the high desert, but where?
Drive up the 5. You've got Pyramid Lake on your left. Keep going. When you get to Quail Lake Road, which is right before you start to really climb the Tejon Pass.
Right before Gorman.
Yeah, exactly. Take a right. It's the 138. It's called Quail Lake Road.
I have to drive. I've driven that route several times when the grapevine has been rained in or snowed in and whatnot. It basically takes you out to Lancaster and Palmdale. Yeah, just south of Mojave.
It's the back way to get to the 14 freeway. But you go about halfway in, so about 15, 20 miles in, there is a Ynez diner. So the town is called Ynez. There's no town there. There's just the diner.
What is the region called, though? I know it's LA County, but is it
So there's an official AVA called the High Desert of the Antelope Valley, which I think
Antelope Valley. Okay.
Yeah.
which I think is probably the worst name ever. So I just this county.
Yes.
Is this the only vineyard that falls under the High Desert AVA of the Antelope Valley?
No, there's
It's a monopole. Yes.
yeah. So no, there's the Swayze Vineyard. There is the Smith Vineyard, which is now called something else. There's the Chavez Vineyard, which is in Lake Los Angeles, like literally in the center of Antelope Valley. Golden Star has a vineyard. There's a couple other small ones as well.
Yeah, I have a wine club member of mine who lives out near, just outside of Bakersfield on the way to Tehachapi. And I know that's a little bit further north than here, but there's 3 or 4 wineries and vineyards growing there. So, and this is near Lake Matthews, right? If I remember correctly, kind of in that.
I don't know where Lake Matthews is.
I think Lake Matthews is just like south of the 138. So it's kind of, it's in that,
Lake Hughes.
Lake Hughes, that's it. Sorry,
Lake
not
Hughes.
Lake Matthews.
Yeah.
Lake Hughes, yes.
Lake
yeah.
Hughes and Elizabeth Lake. So the vineyard I farm in Los Angeles County is literally right across the street from Lake Hughes.
Okay, that's it. Got it.
You said 3,000 feet elevation?
Yeah.
Wow.
Nice. So how did you come across this vineyard? How did you learn about it?
The owner had been, look, there's not that many people working with Los Angeles County fruit.
Right.
So the owner had been selling grapes to home winemakers for years. And he tells this story. He became a dear friend of mine. He said it was always his dream to own a vineyard. So he bought a vineyard and he and his wife put a house on it. He was a retired math teacher. And for the first decade, he would be ecstatic if a home winemaker would show up and buy 100 pounds of fruit. He had 10 acres. I mean, there's 30 tons out there. So 60,000 pounds. And he would sell like 100 or 200 pounds. It was unbelievable. So he was obviously happy to see me when I said, hey, I'll take some fruit. And ultimately, we've worked with 10 or 15 tons of fruit annually from that vineyard. So,
were you the first commercial to buy from him?
Mark Blatty was the first commercial. He was one vintage ahead of me. And it was funny because Mark and I met because Monty, the owner, was trying to play us against each other, and he was a terrible negotiator. And I went to Mark and said, hey, this is going on. And Mark said, I'm hearing the same thing. And then lo and behold, we became friends and ended up founding LA Vintners through that interaction.
Nice. Yes. And Mark's wines are wonderful. And it's nice that you guys are kind of leading the charge for LA County. I know there's a couple of like more downtown LA urban wineries that have popped up there. I don't know if they're using LA fruit or not.
let me turn on my lights. I'm getting dark.
And Angelus Wine Company is part of the LA Vintners as well. You have a tasting room in downtown LA.
So the way it worked was Mark Blatty and I became friends. We started collaborating together, working with vineyards and also on sales efforts. And then we pulled in Jasper and Amy from Angelino Wine Company. And ultimately the 3 wineries for the last 3 vintages have bought every single pound out of the Swayze vineyard. Okay,
nice. So now he's getting full value for his vineyard finally.
It's actually even better than that. His wife decided she'd had enough of the desert. So they were able to sell the vineyard and the house for really good money. And they moved to Oregon, where they now live in effectively a mansion, like on a river in the most gorgeous place ever. So, my work on the planet is done here.
Well, it makes sense with your LA County theory, which is that every 8 years it changes over and you have to deal with new owners. But it sounds like who they sold to.
What's that?
The three wineries didn't want to buy it.
No, my wife's not moving to the desert. I can tell you that. So I was out.
Yeah, you're a little far away from just about everything out in Neenach. So
yes, exactly. But it's beautiful. It's really austere out there, but if you're into that kind of desert environment, it's gorgeous.
I will also say one of the coolest things about that area is it is known for its wildflower super blooms. So in rainy years, it is an amazing place, and a little more accessible, especially for LA, than like the Carrizo Plains out near what's it called? God, I can't, Willow, whatever it is. Yeah, it's a cool place to see some amazing wildflowers. We've driven through there a few times, and just the blooms are incredible. Plus, there's some really massive solar farms out there these days, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, there are. You're like, what is that shining off in the distance?
Exactly.
A giant solar farm.
Yep. Nice. So not only were you sourcing LA County fruit to make it more difficult yourself, but you decided to go with an incredible heirloom varietal that is, relatively unknown to most wine drinkers in Alicante Bouschet. So what attracted you to that grape, or was it kind of a throw in with the Tempranillo that you were buying at the time? And
No. So anyone who's ever heard anything about Alicante Bouschet, if you've read any books, it is generally regarded as the absolute worst grape on the planet. I mean, I don't think I've ever.
Chamberson says, "Hold my beer."
Yeah, exactly. It's I've never read anything good about it, so I personally was very put off by it. It wasn't a variety I had ever drank. I had never seen a bottle of Alicante Bouschet. So I walked by that block of grapes for like 4 years. And I remember it was in 2016, Monty said to me, we were talking after the harvest. I had taken Grenache and I'd taken Tempranillo and I took some Zinfandel. And he said, yeah, it's a shame. We've got 10,000 pounds of Alicante Bouschet hanging in the vineyard. Nobody wants it. So of course nobody wants it. It's supposed to be terrible. And he said, no, actually, I've had a few people make a little bit of wine from it and it's pretty good. And I said, you know what? This is my problem. You know what? I want to take a swing at it. And I said to him, I said, if you'll give me 1,000 pounds, I'm going to make it in my garage. I'm not going to invest commercial money in it, but I'm going to make it in my garage. And if I like it, then the following season I would consider making some. And halfway through fermentation, it was like 4 days in, I went, what is this? This is amazing. It had the best aromatics. It was beautiful. The finished wine was gorgeous. And it was funny. I actually made the wine, bottled it, and I gave a bottle to Amy, who's one of the co-owners of Angelino Wine Company. And I said, can you taste this and tell me what you think? And she called me back a few hours later and she said, what is this magic beverage? She said, I just crushed a whole bottle of it. This is great. I said, it's Alicante Bouschet. She said, oh my God, we'll take the other half of the vineyard. So between myself and Angelino Wine Company, we ended up buying that block of Alicante Bouschet, and it's been great. I have the highest scoring Alicante Bouschet ever produced in the United States, according to Wine Enthusiast.
Wow.
Which was 91 points.
Nice.
So it was a very low bar that we tripped over. But truthfully, I haven't had many examples of Alicante that I really like. I think it's just really well suited to Los Angeles County. That's probably my take on it.
It's surprising because the nose is so big.
Yeah.
And this dark fruit and this kind of bigness that, that's why I think Chris and I thought it would go second. But on the palate, it's got so much acidity.
Yeah.
To be fair, I was going to put it first because I knew that it was. That's the thing about Alicante, is because it's a Teinturier grape, and this is the point where I point out the one fact that people who know about wine know about Alicante Bouschet, which is that it's a Teinturier grape, which means that the juice inside of it is actually red rather than clear, so that when you press it, it comes out red, which is why it was a huge grape planted back in the 20s and 30s during Prohibition, because it could be sold. It also has very thick skins, so it could be transported long distance. It could be sold into home winemaking kits, because when people would press it, they would see the red juice and go, okay, I'm making red wine. I know what I'm doing. But yes, people forget that despite its intense color, the big aromatics, it's actually a very high acidity grape and brings a lot of acid to the party.
It's a tricky grape to work with because the pH will be approaching 4 at harvest. And classic UC Davis winemaking technique would say you need to make an acid adjustment for that wine to be stable. But if you do that, it ruins the wine. It wants to live at kind of a higher pH level because it has good acidity. We won't nerd out on that, but you normally don't see those two things together. You don't see high pH plus high acidity, but in this vineyard, that's what it does.
Yeah. And Carrie, you're absolutely right. A lot of the versions that I have had, and I've sourced a lot from the Central Valley, the Cedar View Vineyard, which is out in Sanger, California, kind of on the way to Kings Canyon National Park, used to make, they had a lot of heirloom Alicante Bouschet, and they used to age theirs for 4 to 5 years before release because it has such a thick skin to it that if you have a younger version of it, it tends to be very tannic. Now, this is a 2019. So how did you combat that, Patrick?
So we harvested 24.5 bricks, ripe, kind of right at that 14.5% alcohol. We destemmed the fruit. Angelino Wine Company actually used some whole cluster fermentation of their Alicante. I thought it would not work. It was actually amazing. It was totally counter to anything I ever thought about winemaking. It added really nice aromatics to it, and I thought it would make it overly tannic. So I haven't done that. We destem the fruit. We ferment it for kind of standard red winemaking, 10 to 14 days. We give it a nice solid press. We put it into barrel, and then we don't touch it for 2 years. I mean, we top up and we do regular sulfur checks, but that is it. I don't rack it all. It just sits in the barrel for 2 years, and it tends to get soft enough. But I always like a little something in it. The one thing about Alicante Bouschet, it has a very short finish. So it's all primary upfront fruit on the palate, and then it fades. It just drops right off. Mm-hmm. You need something else to lengthen that out. In this vintage, it was Tempranillo. In past vintages, it's been Cabernet Sauvignon.
Yeah, it does have a nicer finish to it. There's a little bit of I don't want to call it a bitterness, but kind of a darkness to the finish of it. Yeah. But it's not unpleasant. It just adds an interesting little wrap to it, which is quite nice.
Yeah, I mean, it's got some fruit tannins because of where it's hitting on the tongue.
Yeah,
but the acidity tannins are all on the tongue in the front of the palate. And then there is that kind of like sour cherry, blackberry kind of juice that hits the back.
Yeah, or even like a cherry pit kind of note.
Yeah,
that slight arsenic kind of bitterness from it. Oh, there you go.
Patrick, curious, and the grapes that you're sourcing, are you able to share sort of a range of what they cost in relation to other regions?
Yeah, so Los Angeles County fruit is $1,200 to $1,500 a ton. However, you have to pick it yourself. And when we go out, we have a crew of pickers. There's a wonderful woman named Mabel, and she's got lots and lots of Salvadorian friends, and they bring pupusas, and it's a whole big thing. And there's like 20 of them when we go and pick out at the Swayze Vineyard. So effectively, it works out to be about $1 a pound, so about $2,000 a ton. That's that. For vineyards that we farm ourselves, it actually costs us about $4,000 a ton just to farm them, because we do everything organically, everything's hand done. It's expensive. We go to Santa Barbara. On average, we're spending about $2,500 a ton. You also have to factor in the cost of freight back and forth, whether we're driving it, typically we rent a truck and go up and pick up the fruit. But if I have to pay someone to bring it back, it takes it up to about $3,000 a ton. A ton of fruit makes 2 barrels of wine, which makes about 600 bottles or 50 cases ish.
But so you're saying that the grapes in Ventura cost more than what you're getting in Santa Barbara because
for the pleasure of me working every day during the season in the vineyard, I have to spend nearly twice as much money. Yes.
But if you were selling that fruit, that's what you would be selling it at?
I would. It's been that good. Ventura County, where I am, coastal Ventura County, looks a lot like the Santa Rita Hills. And the going rate for Syrah, as an example, from the Santa Rita Hills is approaching $4,000 a ton.
Yeah. Oh, how far
Because
are
the fruit you're getting from Santa Barbara County is 2,500.
Yeah, 2,500 to $3,000. Yeah, I don't. Some of the fancier vineyards that want $4,000 a ton, I don't think the fruit's better.
Yes.
They're just fancier names. So
those are not my dogs barking in the background.
those are my
Point
dogs.
that out this time. That's
Sorry.
fine.
I would mute myself, but then you guys will.
No. It's we're very dog friendly. We have to be, because I'm the host and I have really loud dogs. So that's just the way we roll here. So how close are your own vineyards to the coast? You keep mentioning that you're in coastal Ventura County, and I don't think of Moore Park as necessarily a coastal location, but how close are you?
So our vineyards are in Santa Rosa Valley. So we're about 15 miles. But if you think, so I'll explain it to people and it'll make sense. Drive from Los Angeles to Camarillo, like you're going to go out to the outlets. You drop down the Camarillo Plain on the 101. To the left-hand side are the Oxnard Plains. That is straight open right to the ocean.
Right.
The first exit at the bottom is Santa Rosa Road. That valley just funnels cold air in like all summer long. So we're typically fogged in up until about 10:30, 11 all summer. And the fog moves out and then comes back. It's a very big moderating effect.
Marine layer.
Yeah, it's amazing. And Moore Park, which you and I both think of as a bit more inland, has this same exact thing. So it pulls all the air in from Ventura, same thing, cools it right off and keeps it, in some cases, 10 to 15 degrees cooler than the adjacent area. So Simi Valley is 10 to 15 degrees cooler or hotter than Moore Park itself. We also have a consistent breeze kind of all summer long. So it's cooler than you would think.
Yeah, you're right. It does have that Santa Rita Hills characteristic compared to like a Ballard Canyon or a Happy Canyon type of situation, or even west side of Paso to east side of Paso, where you get more fog, more ocean breeze because of that proximity. I wouldn't have thought 15 miles, but that makes a lot of sense. Interesting. Yeah, wow. I mean, I love the fact that you were bold enough to work with Alicante Bouschet. All neutral oak on this?
Yes, but I will tell you, I made a version in 2016. If ever anyone's around, I'll share a bottle with you where I used a new oak barrel. Amazing. If you treat Alicante like it's the king, and you just kind of treat it just like you would Cabernet Sauvignon, it really responds well. I mean, new French oak is just amazing. It's just somewhat hard to justify amongst all the things in the winery. What are you going to use a new oak barrel on? And you often don't think, hey, I'll do it up for Alicante, but
I'm going to sell a $75 bottle of Alicante Bouschet. Here we go.
There may be a ceiling,
but I could see that because it has a lot of that same like dark berry fruit that a Syrah has, that like really dark. So I could see how the little vanilla, just a little vanilla or even a pepper hint from American or even French oak would complement that. And then obviously with a new oak barrel, because the tannins in the wine to the barrel tend to even themselves out, I could see it pulling a lot of the tannin out of the young wine into the barrel and balancing things out and softening it up that way.
Yeah, it works really well.
Yeah, nice.
There's a question on barrel prices. Have barrel prices changed during the supply chain issues time? No. Shockingly, a new Seguin Moreau American oak barrel is about $500. A new Seguin Moreau French oak barrel is about $1,100, and that's kind of where they've been.
Yeah, the barrels. I have a friend who is a sales broker for a tonnelier up in Paso, Stacy, and I can tell you that it hasn't been the pricing that's changed. It's been the availability, because she had a ton of product that was stuck on container ships off the port of Los Angeles during the big blockade when it was bottlenecked and they were unable to get stuff in. So it was less about the price and more that things had been ordered and were just taking months to finally get into port, get unloaded, get onto trucks and shipped out to where they needed to go.
The bigger supply chain issue has been glass bottles. Most of the glass bottles used in the United States are from China, and we simply couldn't get them. And what was available, either leftover inventory or inventory that was coming in, was 2.5 times as expensive as it was previously.
Yeah.
If you could find it.
Yeah. Yeah. I got lucky. I had for my home winemaking group, I had a gentleman who put us down for 20 cases that we needed for ours with a co-op group. He was trying to get to 100 cases so he could buy from somebody, and I didn't hear back from him. And then Jason Bouschet, a winemaker we featured here before, he had 22 cases of glass that he was unloading. So I grabbed that. It's actually sitting in the foyer of our house right now. And then, of course, the other guy got back to me and was like, I've got your 20 cases of bottles. So I had to pass those off to some lucky soul. But it's
there's plenty of demand for the bottles. Don't worry. Someone
he was trying to make me feel bad. And I'm like, dude, you're going to be able to unload that like that. Yeah. I don't feel that bad at this point.
Before we move on to the next wine, Patty was just asking me, and I, just thought we could go back a little bit about what you're smelling off of this wine. We talked a little bit about a lot of like dark fruit, but just wanting to know if you're getting anything else off of it that would help our listeners.
Persian mulberry.
Okay.
It's so clear that nobody knows if I'm right or wrong, but if you've ever
Patty, does that help you at all? Like,
if you've ever had Persian mulberries, I think that's the fruit component. I have struggled with tasting notes and aromatics on this wine because the truth is the fruit flavor on this is Alicante Bouschet. It smells like nothing else I've ever had. And I don't know how else to describe it. I'll say this, that once you've smelled Alicante Bouschet and tasted it, you'll be surprised when you find it in an expensive Napa Cabernet because it stands out like a sore thumb. About 2% added into a blend really kind of, it adds quite a bit. Yeah. And I found some quite expensive bottles where I'm like, what is that I'm smelling and tasting? You're like, oh, it's Alicante, which they added for a little bit of upfront fruit and a little bit of aromatics.
And I think also, and Patty, I think this is a great wine as an example to talk about that. You can talk about all the tasting notes and, all that stuff that can seem kind of fantastical to many people because we all smell what we smell. And yes, there are some key things, but it's really how it tastes on the palate. And what's so much more important than what you smell is the taste, the texture. Yeah. If you like the wine because it's big bodied or medium bodied or light bodied, if you like it because it tingles on the tongue or there's a weight on it, those are the things that I think give more guidance to like how you compare it with food, or if you want to drink it on its own or what you like, because you can smell dark fruit all the time, but there are a lot of red wines that are going to have those fruit notes. This doesn't have like the spice and the vanilla and other things. This is fruit, but it's much more about how it tastes and feels on the mouth than it is about the nose.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because several of the Alicantes that I've had before have had really musky noses to them because they're almost sort of grown, almost kind of allowed to just grow. And I know they're a very prosperous vine that can produce tons and tons and tons, which is another reason why they were so popular during the 20s and 30s and the 40s and Prohibition, because you could grow, 10 tons from a single acre, 15 tons, and it would be this dark, heavy, ripe, acidic fruit that you could turn into jug wine, bottle wine, whatever it was, but you wouldn't have any dilution from the heavy vines on it.
Well, I think that, Sandy, I think your point about roses, I think the floral note is coming through a little bit. You have the dark red fruit and low floral. And I know, Chris, you mentioned what Carrie had said about the tannins, but and we know that, I'm just going back to the chat really quickly, that Larry and Sandy had said that they tasted Alicante for the first time in Murphy's and loved it. But it's Mr. David who fell in love with it in Alentejo. So he wanted to know, Patrick, if you've ever had Alicante Bouschet from Portugal.
No, it's funny. My broker who sells wine for me down in the South Bay is going to Alentejo next week. And I've told her, I was like, bring back some Alicante Bouschet. You don't see a lot of it in the US, but it makes up the backbone of their most age-worthy and most expensive red wines over there.
Yeah.
Well, tell her to pick out the Herdade de Mucho, because apparently David really likes that one.
All right.
Yeah, I've been lucky to have a couple of Alentejo Alicantes. I think I actually sold one at my Forgotten Grape Shop, but it was something that I had to seek out. I think there was one distributor who could get me one in it. It's a grape that, it's similar to Valdegui, and there were all these great heirloom grapes, forgotten grapes that were so prominent in California back before we were truly considered a wine growing state. And then once the Judgment of Paris happened, it was like, we're going to focus on Cab, we're going to focus on Chard, we're going to focus on Pinot, boom, boom, boom. And that became our raison d'etre, and all these great small unknown varietals kind of fell by the wayside. Charbonneau and Carignan and like I said, Valdegui and some of these. It's a bit of a shame, but
I think Alicante in particular suffered from the fact that it was made for nearly 20 years just from home winemakers.
Yeah.
Who don't always make great wines. So there's a perception that the grape itself could be at fault, but the reality is it could have just been the hand that made it as well.
Yeah, very similar to the way that I think Chenin Blanc gets sort of downgraded by a lot of people because it was such a big component of the jug white wines of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. Roger and Peggy wanted a little help with some food pairings on this one, and it is a really tricky wine to pair because it has such a big, overwhelming flavor to it, but it has that high acidity.
Barbecue.
Well, it's funny you mentioned that. So I'm thinking like Chinese spare ribs. Like I could see that plum sauce. My mom, when she used to make spare ribs for us, she would use a more molasses-based sauce than ketchup or tomato-based. So I think having that sort of stickier, sweeter style sauce on the ribs with the acidity, with that bigger, bolder berry flavors on this would be a really, really nice pairing. I could see, Chinese spare ribs, molasses-based spare ribs would be interesting. I could even see, it might be a bridge too far, but I'm thinking like a mole sauce, like that bitter.
I was thinking mole. I was going to say, yeah, totally.
Yeah.
There's something about the.
Scott like, says smoked brisket, which, absolutely. I think anything heavily smoked would pair really, really nicely with this. That smoke would, again, it's that Syrah. You've got the Syrah flavors. The one thing you're missing is that smoky aspect, and I think having that on that would be phenomenal.
Roasted lamb. If we kill a lamb, we can eat it like David had at the winery.
Yeah, the Cataocas aren't here, so we can get away with saying that tonight. But I may have to edit that out for the future. We have some vegans among us, so.
No. Oh, all right. So let's riff on that for a second. What would you do for a vegan pairing?
Wow, this is an interesting one with the vegan pairing. I'm thinking, even though it is something that I can't physically eat because of a genetic condition, I'm thinking eggplant. Yes. Oh, apparently Matt agrees with me. Yes. I could see like a ratatouille or even like a eggplant parmesan with something like this. I think would be grilled portobello with balsamic. Portobello has such a subtle flavor though, and I think the balsamic, this has so much acid.
Yeah.
Adding a vinegar to it, I think would be overwhelming.
But I do think that if you put on a like more of a barbecue sauce with the portobello, or if you did something like that, it could really work well. I think you can use portobello as the kind of meat texture. You just want to not use the acid.
Yes. David says that I'm lucky I can't eat eggplant. Thank you, Patty. Appreciate that. Here's my sneaky pairing with this one. Sweet potato. I think it's so earthy and sweet that having the flavor, I can picture, apparently I'm a flavor synesthete. I think I can picture like sweet potato and this wine going pretty well together. Pumpkin pie. I'm going to try this with pumpkin pie next time Thanksgiving. We're going to make that happen. Beautiful. All right. So from the decadent to the sublime, we're going to move on to our final wine, the 2019 Los Olivos District Sangiovese. And it sounds like this was one of the first grapes that you sourced for your own winemaking. So, why Sangiovese? Why was it something that appealed to you? Why was it your muse, to circle back to our first wine we had tonight, that led you into this?
So it's funny. There's a lot of Sangiovese planted in backyard vineyards, kind of here and there, Ventura County, Los Angeles. And it all harkens back to some trip that a couple took to Italy, where they loved Tuscany and they had Sangiovese and they fell in love with it. And it's the same for me. My wife and I, on our honeymoon, we went to Italy. We spent 15 days traveling all over there. And I was like, wow, it's amazing. I have not been blown away by a lot of California Sangioveses. And I just happened to be lucky enough to find a block that worked really, really well in Santa Ynez. But the genesis was literally linking back to times that we had spent in Europe and just loved Sangiovese. So that's why it was Sangiovese. And a matter of fact, had I known, hindsight being 2020, and the fact that people generally gravitate towards more known varieties, I probably wouldn't have chosen it. But it's worked out well for us. This became really quickly a super popular wine for us, and nearly every wine shop that we took it into took it because they were like, we don't have any Sangiovese that's any good. So lo and behold, it's worked out. And unfortunately, this block of Sangiovese I visited yesterday, and the current growers seem to have killed it. So,
oh no,
yes,
like red blotch or just not tending to it well.
It was all, so we always had a suspicion that it was virus. And in fact, in 2018, we had a heat spike in Los Olivos. I visited the vineyard and there was not a leaf on the Sangiovese. It completely dropped all its canopy and called it quits in August for the season. So we had a suspicion that the block was virus, but the new owners really had overcropped it. They triple cropped from what we had done previously. And that was the end of it. Just the vines just couldn't recover from that.
Interesting. Is that because they just had such a demand for it that they decided to kind of maximize their profits while they could, sort of a short-term thinking?
Who can answer these questions?
It's true. Fair.
Marcy, you're a big Sangiovese fan, huh? So this is hitting the spot.
Well, let us know if you need more. We know where to get it. But
there is literally 2 cases in existence, so you would have to let me know basically now.
Yeah.
I just had to stick my cork back in to try and save it because I know another Sangiovese lover that I'm going to see in 3 days. So you think it'll last 3 days, Patrick?
Oh, will the wine go 3 days? Absolutely.
Okay.
I've yet to see the backside of one of my wines, and just personal testament, I tend to drink 1 glass of wine a night. So a bottle of wine lasts me 5 nights. And I'm never on night number 5 going, oh, you know what? This is a little tired. It's
because Amber, Chris and I have a mutual friend, and she is a Sangiovese obsessed lover. So I will introduce her to this.
Yeah, Patrick, I had so much respect to you up until that 1 glass of wine a night line.
Well, that's
I'm
kind
like,
of, look, man, I'm in the wine business. There's wine around all the time. You got to
Don't get high on your own supply is what you're saying.
Exactly.
That's actually smart.
Yeah.
So why do you think that Sangiovese hasn't caught on like it should? Because it seems to me that California, Southern California, the Central Coast has, all of the like prime categories, variables that Tuscany has, that Chianti has. Allison, our Italian expert, go ahead.
Well, I just spent 3 weeks traveling with an Italian American who lives in Italy,
Robert Camuto.
Yes. You have to stop texting me images because I can't text you back. He blocked my number, so he doesn't accept my phone calls or texts. But no, I was traveling with Robert.
Does that happen a lot with men, Allison?
All the time. No, I was traveling with Robert Camuto, who writes for winespectator.com and writes about Italian wine, and just wrote a book, South of Somewhere. And we were traveling around and we visited wineries in Paso, Santa Barbara, Napa, and Sonoma, who are all working with Italian grapes here. And his first story just came out if you go to Robert Camuto Meets on winespectator.com, he writes about 2 of the Paso wineries. But what we were talking to these producers about is why these Italian grapes, I mean, these are really big proponents of Italian grapes, but why they don't do well. And one of the issues that it came down to is the Calatal movement that happened in the late 90s. Mm-hmm. The reason it failed is they were planting Sangiovese in Napa and blending it with Cabernet. Right. And you had like Antinori and some of the other big guys all do this. It was a failure. They
Trying
were all
to be super Tuscans.
Yeah, they were part of the Calatal movement. When it failed, they pulled it all out, and the funding kind of went away, and the energy went. And the message that I heard from every producer was, it was just planted in the wrong place for so long that the mentality has been, because they failed and planted in Napa, and you just shouldn't plant this shit in Napa. You got to plant it everywhere else.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think that's what's hurt Sangiovese, is that there's this preconceived idea people have of where it belongs and what it is.
Yeah.
And leave it to Napa to have screwed that up.
Well, yeah, and that's interesting because some of the best Sangioveses that I've had outside of, Cavaletti, are from the Sierra foothills area. You have like Vino Noceto up there, which I think does one of the best California Sangioveses up there, and they really, really focus on it. Paso, there are a few producers. They're not, oddly, I find we have more Nebbiolo than Sangiovese here, which is surprising, but I know obviously Barbera does well in Sierra foothills as well, but yeah, it seems like a grape, much like I think of Tempranillo, where Tempranillo seems to be, oh, am I frozen?
No, you're fine.
No, okay, good. Tempranillo is a varietal that I think could do very, very well in the California environment, sort of, especially Central Coast and Southern California. But I thought 10 years ago it was prime for a takeover, and you would see it as a dominant grape, and it's just never caught on, which I'm always surprised about. I guess it is the money.
It's about the money. There's if you want to hear a good earful of why it fails, Dan Petrosky from Massican in Napa, mm-hmm. who was making Cabernet at a big winery, but has been a strong proponent about, like Cabernet is not the answer in Napa, and that it's these grapes, Tempranillo, it's thinking future and how these grapes can really thrive in the area, because you've got to think about, the lack of rain, the soil, the hotter climates, and these Mediterranean grapes do really well in those places.
Tempranillo is awesome. So it's one of the main 5 varietals that I work with. We're not talking about Tempranillo tonight, but it just kills it. It grows so well. But to be fair, Tempranillo, you have to get really, really ripe for it to get interesting in California. Mm-hmm. Like I harvest it in November.
Yeah. But see, that's why I thought a place like Paso Robles, would be prime time for like East Side Paso Robles, where you're getting, heat upon heat upon heat, and you can adjust your canopy for it. Like that to me just screams, let's do Tempranillo all day, every day. Temecula is a place that should be just rampant with Tempranillo because yeah, but the problem is you're having to introduce basically a new varietal to people from San Diego, Orange County, and LA, who want Cab and Chardonnay and Pinot, even though you're not in an environment to grow it there. No, that's interesting because I think it is a lot about location and where people, what they should be growing. And Hart Winery in Temecula has done several red Italians. I know, Allison, you were down in Temecula recently. Did you see more Italians popping up down there?
Absolutely. I think the grapes that are thriving in Temecula are the Spanish and grape varieties. I think that I think the producers who are really focused on using these Mediterranean grapes are the ones that are making wines that are much more enjoyable to drink, much more balanced, much more interesting. And some Rhone and stuff like that, but your typical Bordeaux varieties are just not, I think, what shines in a climate like Temecula.
Yeah,
I agree.
Yeah. Don't get me started on why I don't think we should be growing Syrah up here in Paso. That it's a cold weather grape that does not thrive in the warmer weather of Paso. But that's neither here nor there. We're getting to inside baseball. We're getting away from the wine. Let's talk about this Sangiovese. Los Olivos district. I know you said before you had been buying. No, sorry, you weren't buying Sangiovese from Swayze. It was Tempranillo from Swayze. But
no, so this is Sangiovese from the Estelle Vineyard, planted and farmed by Bonatera Farming originally. Now owned and farmed by someone else who shall remain nameless. So I have a few thoughts on Sangiovese in particular. So I have made 4 or 5 different Sangioveses. I think part of the issue in California is clonal selection. So the 2 Sangioveses that I've made that I have totally loved are both Rodino clone Sangiovese, which tends to be relatively unique. There's no history of it in Europe. Nobody seems to know where it came from. Showed up in Napa.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It basically was originated in Napa, so it is a true Calatal.
Could be a seedling. It is darker. It is more tannic. It holds acidity super well. It is just a bigger. It's distinctly different from other Sangioveses that I've worked with. I personally love it. If we find out down the road that it's half its lineage is Syrah, I won't be super surprised because it gets a little dirty and reductive on the nose in the same way that Syrah does. But it's, for me, probably the only Sangio I would choose to work with moving forward would be that particular clone of Sangiovese.
Yeah, we're going to find out it was like Rafosco or something they planted that just mutated. It's just something random. Probably. It's like the Carmenere that they thought was Merlot in Chile.
Yeah. So that's my take on this. A few other things about some of the failures in Napa Valley. So I have found that this clone of Sangiovese doesn't pair well with better Cabernets. And I'm going to say better in air quotes. Your sort of more classic fruit forward Cabernets, it doesn't blend well with. So the stuff that Napa is really known for aren't good blending components. You need a Cabernet Sauvignon that's a bit more coastal and a bit more herbal and, dare I say, dirty.
Yeah, some of those green notes to it, that minty.
It pairs perfectly with that, but not with big fruit forward Cabernets. So that could be the other aspect of it.
Interesting. So how are you producing the Sangio? You're sourcing you're bringing the grapes in, take us through the process.
So let's start off in the vineyard. So I am sampling every week coming into harvest. And this Sangiovese in particular, tasting the berries probably twice a week. We drive up twice a week, sample. There's a certain amount of phenolic bitterness and astringency in the seeds that I'm looking for that to resolve. That typically happens late, like right around Halloween. everyone else has picked the Sangiovese already. I wait until that point happens, and it happens from one day the seeds are astringent, the following day those tannins are gone. It's enjoyable. We harvest. Usually that's right around 15% potential alcohol. Bring it in, destem it, straightforward fermentation. In this case, it was native fermentation, 14 days on the skins, press it, that's it, neutral oak, and then blended right before bottling. And I have tried a number of different components to blend into this and recreated the same wine twice by blending in the same component out of everything that was in the winery. So Ventura County Cabernet Sauvignon just worked right at around 11%, 9 to 11%. I think I've got 1% Tempranillo in here, and that was just because we topped off the barrel of Cabernet with Tempranillo. So
interesting.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's lovely. It's got great acidity. It's has a lot of depth and darker fruit flavors to it, which, it's not your standard Chianti Sangiovese, which is probably another thing that has hurt the Sangiovese market in California, is that Chiantis, even some Chianti Classicos, are just so inexpensive that I think most people think of Sangiovese not as that's how the whole Super Tuscan concept got started, was that the great growers of Sangiovese and Chianti basically didn't want to be selling their wines for pittance. So they petitioned the government to allow them to grow Cab and Cab Franc and Merlot so they could blend it and make these more expensive wines. But you mentioned, this is kind of a flagship for you, something you've been growing since the beginning of your time there. Do you blend this at all, or do you just do straight? Have you thought about maybe doing a Super Tuscan style, or maybe blending it with a few other things?
I don't have the label in front of me, but it has 9% Cabernet Sauvignon in.
I know, but a true blend, like an under 75% blend type thing.
So I just must be a terrible winemaker, and I'll tell you why I say this, because we'll
let everybody take a vote on that at the end.
That kind of blending doesn't really work for me. It's not where, in my heart of hearts, I'm thinking of the varietal, and all I want to do is round out whatever could be better in that particular wine. I'm not thinking about creating something totally different that has my imprint all over it. I'm thinking, how do I make this Sangiovese just a little bit better, but still identifiable as Sangiovese? So I have had absolutely no luck whatsoever producing blends that are 25% of this, 25% of that, 50% of that.
Right.
It's always, it could be independently labeled as a varietal wine, and that would be completely within the guidelines.
Interesting.
So it's probably that I'm a bad winemaker. That's what I'm going to say. I'm a bad winemaker.
Well, so that actually is a nice kickoff to one of my one of the questions I was wondering about, which is, you made this decision in China. I'm going to become a winemaker. I'm going to start it. How did you learn to make wine? Did you have a mentor? Did you take classes? Did you have somebody who kind of showed you the ropes? Who was guiding you, or are you truly self-taught?
You can learn everything on YouTube, man. You don't need a mentor these days. Mentors are outdated. No.
Wow.
The truth is, I've never had a mentor. I've never.
Why is my speaker not working?
Oh, your speaker's working now, Matt.
We can hear you. All right. He just muted himself. I'm going to mute him. There we go. All right.
I've not learned from anybody. It is completely self-taught. I think the science of winemaking is high school level chemistry. I do have a science degree as a bachelor's. So that part's relatively easy, but the portion of, if I harvest this, I make it in this way, and it ends up with this finished product 2 and 3 years down the road, is experiential. And I don't know that anyone can teach you that. You can certainly accelerate the learning if I was to have gone and worked at a commercial winery, but that wasn't the path for me. I just got after it, made a lot of wine, made plenty of mistakes, but
Died.
found my way through it.
I wonder if it was something
Matt continues to unmute himself, which is a bold move. He really wants to take over the podcast.
We're
That's
4
right.
wines in, of course. He's excited.
Exactly. Yes. Well, that's a bold move, like, to be making your own, but that's impressive. And your mentor should be proud at this point, because you're doing a great job with your wines and really, really nice stuff. I know Allison keeps circling back to your own home vineyards in Ventura. Are there any plans to expand that, or will your wife let you have a little more room there now that you've proven to be a success with other things?
So we took out a vineyard as Zinfandel. We're replanting it to Syrah, Grenache, and Mourvedre, which I think are better suited to that particular site. That vineyard that we're working on sits on a solid chunk of limestone. It's about 10 inches of topsoil on top of solid limestone. So that's a rare find for us. So don't tell anybody about that. Keep it a secret amongst yourselves. 3 years from now, we'll be releasing a wine from there, hopefully. Nice. But what I'm looking for now, actually, I joked before that properties turn over about every 8 years on average in the United States. There are a few multi-generational farmers in Ventura County who are committed to the next generation of farming. And those are the people that I'm looking towards now to say, hey, let's do something interesting together about planting out other vineyards. So we're working on that. We don't have anything firm, but I do have one awesome location that I'm hoping to plant out next year. So in my heart of hearts, I'd love to do everything right here in Ventura County if I could. I don't have to go 109 miles. I can, but I don't have to. 2 miles would be better.
Since we have a lot of people here from the Inland Empire, have you been sourcing anything from Rancho Cucamonga recently, or?
Yeah. So I worked with what used to be called the Gateway Vineyard. It's at the junction of 4th and Haven. It is an abandoned vineyard, used to be farmed by Galliano. We did Zinfandel with a hint of Mission, and then we also did a Zinfandel and 40% Mission blend from there. Beautiful. Dry farmed, own rooted, basically unfarmed vineyard.
Right.
Probably we won't be able to do that for another year. It's supposed to be developed into a Marriott courtyard.
Yeah.
This Rancho Cucamonga needs more Marriott courtyards, as I understand it.
That airport is thriving.
Yeah.
How many people go to? Sorry.
Well, no, the airport is getting busier and busier, and it's going to become more of a hub. So as a result of that, they need more.
If LAX will open it up, which they've been because they control it, and they've been very strict with the amount of flights they've been able to get it in and out of there.
So with the impending demise of that vineyard, we have gone over to the Lopez Vineyard, farmed by Galliano, right at the junction, 15 and the 210.
Yep. We
took, I have a habit of just starting off with a ton of fruit, seeing if I like it, making the wine, seeing how it ages. I'm very bullish on that vineyard, as are a bunch of other people. It's, not just me. So this year I'm committed to doing 4 tons of Zinfandel from there.
Oh, all right. And Scott let us know that Ontario took back ONT Airport. So I guess that's why it's opening up. Also, rest in hell, Don Galliano. But sorry, not a fan of the man.
His son is delightful.
I hope so, because he was one of the worst human beings I've ever met in my life. But that's one of 2 people I ever kicked out of my wine shop. Yeah, but that's a whole different story.
The son's a good dude. Give the son a chance.
I'm willing to, and I don't have a wine shop to kick him out of, so we're good. Nice. So we'll kind of touch on the food prospects for this wine very quickly. Sangiovese, I think, classic bolognese would be fantastic with this. Sausage and peppers. Tricky game every time someone just talk out on that. I love it. It's worse than the ones on Watch What Happens Live. What else would you pair with this? I mean, I think, yes, it's like, pure classic Italian red sauce, bistecca fiorentini, like, you know.
Yeah, I was thinking of a steak. I mean, that in my head, that's where I was going with it. But spaghetti, of course, is going to be good. Any red sauce. Oh, what else? Now that we're talking about it, I really want meatballs, to be honest.
There you go.
Yeah.
Allison, you're our Italian expert.
I mean, Sangiovese is not my normal Italian grape. I'm more of a Northern Italian girl in my wines, but I agree. I think Sangiovese is high in acid and that works with tomato sauce. You don't want to have a tannic wine with tomato sauce. Tannins and tomatoes are not friends.
Yes.
Tannins and tomatoes, like if you try a Cabernet with your tomato sauce, you'll get a metallic taste in your mouth. It's not that, I mean, you can pair anything you want, but sometimes there are things that just don't work. And I don't think you want metallic in your mouth by mixing a tannic wine like Cabernet with like a tomato sauce. So, you know, I would take a note for Sangiovese. I take a note from what they drink in Tuscany and what they eat in Tuscany. And it's a nice grilled steak. It's a
pork
lovely
and beef
tagliatelle with mushrooms could be really good with it. With like portobello or porcini, sorry, not portobello, porcini mushrooms could be good. A ragu. I'm thinking about meatballs too now, Patrick.
Yeah.
Yeah, that meat, but not something heavy. Like, you know, I don't think like a short rib or like a really heavy meat. I think, you know, the like meatballs are a little lighter and
well, it's that pork and beef combo where you get, you know, the nice saltiness of the pork and then the richness of the beef sort of.
Well, let's just be fair. If you make a proper ragu or meatball, it's 3 meats. It's beef, pork, and veal.
I'm coming over for dinner.
We don't say the V word on this virtual tasting, because, you know.
Not in America, but boy, in Italy, they know their veal very well.
Right. So as we're wrapping up here, Patrick, if folks want to come out and visit you in Moore Park, which I highly recommend they do at this point, you should be the main attraction, and the Biggest Little Farm should be the secondary visit for most people. The Epcot to your Magic Kingdom, if you will. How can they do that?
So we are open Fridays from 4 to 8, Saturdays and Sundays from 12 to 6. I always recommend making a reservation on the website, but we accept walk-ins. Apparently people in Moore Park haven't caught on to reservations, so we'll let anybody in. Just be aware that we get pretty busy on the weekends, and sometimes you got to wait a little bit for seating. But you can find my wines on our website, cavalettivineyards.com. Anything that you send through the website, if you've got an email inquiry, you want to call, it all ends up with me. So feel free to reach out at any point. But I'd love to see your smiling faces at the winery. There was also a question, by the way. I have noticed that some of the wines have names and others are just a grape name. Curious about that. It kind of depends. So I think about whether or not if there's a theme or a story behind the wine, and then I'll give it a fanciful name, but sometimes it's just Sangiovese and we love it at that, and that's good enough. It just kind of depends.
Well, in fairness or in defense, your first 2 wines are blends and your second 2 wines are not. So maybe that also plays into it.
They just sometimes, as you're sitting down, you're thinking about labels, there's something that stands out behind the wine that makes you say, it represents this in my mind. That's all. It's an imperfect process. It just kind of bubbles up organically, or it doesn't, despite us wishing that we were more creative than we are.
Yeah, I guess we should have touched on this at the beginning, but how did the name, the Muse, come to be associated with that wine?
Well, the Muse was
a nice way of saying I made a mistake.
Exactly. I couldn't call it the screw up, but I was like, what's the flip side of that? I said, well, it totally worked out. So I must have been guided. So that became the name of the Muse.
And they would sue you if you went with Beautiful Mistake, because there's some big mega corporation that owns that brand. So Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Your wines are exquisite. A really good example of, how you can really source grapes from unexpected areas and create something new. I should ask, what's going on with the Los Angeles Vintners Association? Is it something is it growing, or are you seeing more wineries that are getting involved in that?
We are. So we've welcomed, I think, 3 or 4 new members in the last year. We've done more tastings and events. So we try to do 4 events per year where we have multiple wineries pouring.
Did you bring in, I went to Raw Wine last week and I saw Abe Schoner and I was like, he's making wine in LA.
So
that shocked me.
I have a Don Galliano comment. Making wine in Los Angeles, not from Los Angeles. It's a difference. So
I thought he was sourcing some stuff from here. No,
not a berry.
Got it. I know my good friend Tommy Booth up here in Paso Robles is planting and farming a lot of vineyards in LA. He just installed a vineyard for Kevin Hart on his property.
Does he still come down this way?
Oh yeah, he's down every now and then. He's so busy with his pepper wines and all his like ska band wines that
he's a nut, that guy. He's a good dude.
He just celebrated I think it was the 5th anniversary of Wine Boss being open on Saturday. So he's doing well. Yes.
That's good.
Yeah.
Good guy.
Awesome. Cool. Well, I am going to thank you for being here. I'm going to stop the recording. And at this point, if anybody wants to